was around 4 or 5. I lived with my mom in the Philippines. Back then, it was always a fun pastime to share stories about hauntings with my cousins and friends, but I personally never had one at that point. That all changed one night. As a kid, I had very vivid nightmares that I considered to be extreme for a child like myself to handle. Because of these dreams, I have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and being afraid to go back to sleep. Unusually, I woke up abruptly one night, but I don't remember having a nightmare that time. Then I had this sense that I should look behind me, like when one's watching a scary video and you feel the need to check your surroundings. Before I did, I looked at my mom, who was in a deep sleep next to me. After doing so, I looked behind me to my pillow, and to my utter dismay, there was a man lying down on my pillow as I sat up. I'll try my best to recall what I saw in detail, seeing as it was about 14 years ago now. The man's face had a weird look to it. His skin was painted with what I could only describe as camouflage, like the ones that soldiers used on themselves. I got only a brief glimpse, but he looked like he was resting, both eyes closed. He made no interactions with me, nor did I attempt to interact with him. I quickly turned back to look away from what I just saw, and I began to mumble prayers to myself. I began to break down, and that's as far as I can remember. I don't remember if I got sleep that night or what I did after. I believe about a year before that experience, my grandfather from my dad's side of the family had passed away. I didn't know much about him, aside from small calls I got from him and my dad. Interestingly enough, when I brought this story up to my grandmother years later, after moving to California, she said that it might have been him paying a visit. She told me that he was a veteran. He served in World War II. I hadn't known about this prior to her mentioning it, and in retrospect, I guess the camouflage thing makes more sense now. It was a really weird experience because it was the only time I could say that I've seen a ghost. My grandfather's, to be exact. Ironically, I don't have a strong feeling towards ghostly presences anymore since my move to California. It's almost like I don't believe in them anymore. But that one experience was so vivid and traumatizing in a way that it always reminds me to believe that there are more than we know out there. This happened way back in 2013, when I was in junior college. It was our college organization's annual art camp. For a short description, we're all in the fine arts department, and our organization holds this art camp where there's seminars from our professors and mentors, and all in all, team building activities. It's usually set up in a recreational venue. So, as I said, I was in junior, and it was our year as the officers of the said organization. So, we're the ones who chose the venue, planned the games, itineraries, and such. To give a brief description of the place, it's a rural area around Laguna in the Philippines. It's a huge recreational area with a hanging bridge leading to a campfire, pool area, and obstacle courses. In the middle of the venue, there's a huge open space function hall where the seminars were held. Our cabins were hidden by trees located far behind the hall. The first cabin was for the mentors and professors, while the last two were occupied by higher year students. The middle three were occupied by the rest of the students. On the right side of the function hall, there's an outdoor lounge area with a life-size chessboard. If you walk straight further, there's the obstacle course area. Further from it, the pool and the foresty area where the campfire and hanging bridge are located. This particular story was experienced by my classmates. It was already night, around 8 p.m., Our scheduled seminar was already finished and everyone was done with their dinner. Some of the students were chilling in the patio area of the cabin, some walking around, and others, us, the officers, were busy planning tomorrow's activities. The guys, Gab, Wally, Kev, Alan, and Hero, were chatting and chilling inside their cabin. One of them decided to explore around. Hero suggested that they play at the chessboard area, so they decided to go, all of them, except for one. Gab approached Frank, a freshman, dozing at the top bunk. He asked if he wanted to come with them, but Frank was sleepy and he said no, turning his back to them. Before leaving, Gab asked Frank if it's all right to borrow his slippers because he had none, and Frank signaled okay. So the 5 guys were heading out of the cabin, fooling around, laughing. They look around and they saw students slowly heading to each of their cabins to rest. They were almost a few yards away from the chessboard when Gabe noticed that someone was walking parallel to them. The guy was heading to the large old coconut tree adjacent to the chessboard area. Gab was confused and stopped walking. Wally, Kev, Alan, and Hero noticed the walking guy as well. It was already dark, and with minimal lights around, it was hard for them to see far. Gab tried to rub his eyes and he recognized the walking guy. It was Frank. They all shouted, "Frank, come here!" Hero realized that Frank stopped walking and turned to them. No expression at all. Alan was confused as well, and he asked if it was really Frank. Gab realized something creepy and faced the guys. "How could it be Frank when I'm wearing his only slippers?" he mumbled nervously. They all looked at the guy that they were calling earlier and noticed it continued walking and then suddenly disappeared behind the old tall coconut tree. The guys collectively gasped, ran, and shouted loudly back to their cabin. When they reached the door, Wally opened it, only to find out that Frank was sleeping deeply with his headphones on. They woke him up, slapped him softly, and asked him if he was okay or if he had walked outside. Frank rubbing his eyes open, saying no, confusedly. The 5 guys had gotten so scared that they were trying to outrun each other, heading to our cabin to tell us what happened. I was so scared, but not actually surprised, since it felt creepy around the area during nighttime. It just felt really strange and off. I had my experience the night before, but I wasn't sure it was paranormal. I was the only one awake at the time. It was 2 a.m., and I hear giggling around our cabin, like kids running around, chasing each other. I also noticed silhouettes walking past our screen door, though I personally tried to dismiss it, thinking of it as some of the students were just still awake, fooling around outside. But I wasn't able to sleep until 5 a.m. So, I believe that place had ghosts and elements in it, as per the recount of some of the students as well, not just mine. You can easily tell if something is creepy in a place just by the feels it gives off. I went to a week-long snowboarding camp during winter break in middle school. Living near a mountain, I'd never really had an interest in the sport. But a few of my friends were going, and I didn't want to spend the whole vacation sitting at home by myself while they got to go make memories that would solidify them as better friends than me, of course. So, a week earlier, my dad takes me to a little winter sports shop to get my board, required gear. The camp had sent out a letter explaining everything I'd need to be prepared for the week. At camp, the cabins were separated by boys on the left and girls on the right side of the hill. Then, we were grouped off by skill levels.
I was assigned to the Green Gecko's cabin, meaning for one whole week I'd have to wear a bright green t-shirt with a smiling, toothy gecko on it, while rarely getting to see my friends because they were in the intermediate cabins. Each troop had 5 girls and a counselor. The cabins were relatively big, and on the left and the right walls are 2 bunk beds each, then 1 normal bed toward the back wall for the counselor. I got the bottom bunk, but each bed had a little window, probably 24 inches by 12 inches, longer than it is wide. You could open the window to let in air, but there was a thick mesh screen to keep the animals out. Since getting there, I've kept my window open while sleeping. I enjoyed breathing in the crisp air while in my warm sleeping bag as I dozed off. But midweek, I thought I was still dreaming when I was awoken by someone whistling to get my attention. Assuming one of my friends had snuck out, I rolled over and looked through the mesh. But peering through the other side of the fabric barrier, there was a girl, and she looked identical to me. She wore a smile as if she already had known how familiar we were. I couldn't help but smile back. She gestured for me to come outside. I whispered, no, too afraid of waking up my counselor. The girl crawled out of view. When she returned, she had a small black plastic bag, like one you'd get from the gas station. She opened the plastic bag, revealing a heap of candy. Again, I whispered, no. I didn't want to risk getting caught. I suggested that we meet up at breakfast the next morning. She made a high, squealy grunt before standing and running away, leaving the bag of candy next to the window. When she stood up, I noticed that she had no shoes on. Then I noticed her shirt was the same green and white as my cabin's colors. Then she was gone, into the darkness of the trees. I laid there for a moment, questioning if I'd just had a lucid waking dream. I laid back down, and maybe a half hour later, I heard camp security quietly open our cabin door. They shine the flashlight from bed to bed. I pretend I'm asleep, facing the wall as the light scans the bunks. The security guard then quietly steps out, beeps his walkie-talkie saying, "No, they're all accounted for," before walking away. The next morning, I wake up and I almost forgot about the night's happenings, chalking them up as a really strange dream. It's only when I go outside and I see the small black plastic bag that it all becomes vivid again, half covered in a dusting of snow. The black plastic reflected off the morning sun. I walked over and picked up the bag, remembering all of the candy that was previously shown to me. When I untied the bag and I opened it, what laid inside were 3 dead frogs, their innards cut out in a frozen pool that conjoined the 3 frogs like an atrocity of God. I dropped the bag, immediately telling my counselor what had happened and showing them the bag. At breakfast, I never did see the girl that looked like me. For the rest of the week, camp security heightened their patrols on their snowmobiles around the cabins. When I was in the 3rd grade, I made friends with the new girl in town, Allison. She moved into the house next door to my already best friend, Emily. Before her, the home was owned by an old couple who raised their family there, I guess. We never met any kids, and we never went over there, except for Halloween. We'd go trick-or-treating. Anyway, it was sort of exciting to get to go into this new house that we'd seen from the outside so many times, but never the inside. We would spend a lot of time playing between the houses, Emily's and Allison's, as my house was 2 streets over. Both houses were bright, let lots of light in, similar layouts like most of the houses in our neighborhood. But in some ways, Allison's home was just a little different. It hadn't been remodeled, sort of thing. Large, foggy, yellow glass windows above the front door, instead of the clear glass window above Emily's. The flooring in most of Allison's house was this dark brown laminate flooring. Some areas were carpet, also dark brown, sort of thicker. Either way, Allison's family was really nice. Everything was normal there, but there were times that it felt straight out of a dream, despite being wide awake. The first sleepover, it was actually the last one. I came up with many excuses in the future, as did Emily, for why we couldn't stay the night. The other thing about Allison's house, it was her basement. Of course, it wasn't finished like all the other houses, like Emily's. Her basement was a laundry room, I guess, but these exposed walls, you could see through to the crawl space when you were down there. Basically, you could walk right into the basement walls. Not that anyone would want to. Super, super creepy. What was even worse is that this basement didn't have a door. The door had been removed. It was unclear if they were going to be reconnecting the door, but either way, from the inside, it remained doorless. During our sleepover, it was decided that we would be sleeping in the living room. I'd opted to sleep on the couch since I wasn't really fond of the floor, and I didn't want a crowd on a chair. As I lay on the couch, I'm immediately uncomfortable by the fact that I have a perfectly clear view of the basement doorway. A dark hallway that's only made lighter by the fact that the basement area is pitch black. It's from there, this vantage point, I see something shadowed emerge from the doorway. Immediately, I jump up, letting out a scream before covering my mouth to muffle the scream. Both Allison and Emily don't know what I'm doing, and they ask exactly that. Feeling like a fool, I explain myself, but I only felt more foolish as they grinned at me. I took my place on the couch and I just faced the other direction. Of course, this just made me feel like I was being watched from behind, so I opted to sleep on the floor with the other two. As we tried to fall asleep, well, Emily and I, since Allison was already sleeping, we turned off the TV and just joked around in the somewhat dark living room. The glow from the kitchen above the stove light provided just enough light for us to kind of see each other. I then see Emily's face, and I can see that she's looking just past and above me. Her face goes from normal Emily to something I've never seen. I don't even know how or why we both jolted up at the same time, but we did. I quickly turned to face the direction that she was facing, the direction of the basement. I see nothing, but it feels awful to look in that direction. I feel Emily grab my arm, then my hand. She looked like me, she said softly. What? Who? I said. But Emily didn't answer further. Instead, she laid back down and said, maybe we should just go to sleep. And I guess that's when we both tried and eventually succeeded in falling asleep. I didn't stay asleep, though. I woke up. No idea what time it was or how much time had passed because I didn't move. The sun hadn't come up yet. I woke up to Emily, but it wasn't Emily, it was her voice. It sounded like she was talking to someone in the other room, in the basement. I almost followed the sound. I thought she was saying my name. My body moved and I was almost up. But then I saw that she's laying right next to me. I don't know why there were two Emilys. I don't know what happened to Allison's house, but something just wasn't right. Hated that feeling so much. Is that what an evil spirit feels like, you think? Why did it choose Emily's form? Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this before? Alright, so this must have been early 2000s during the summer, after I was in 3rd or 4th grade. My mom had just gotten a new flip phone, and if you remember, back then, you could record audio and make it your ringtone. I was in the back seat of her van as my mom was driving me home from her parents. We'd just pulled out of the driveway when I took her phone to record the guitar solo that was playing on the radio. I honestly wish I could remember what song it was, but unfortunately, I do not. It was most likely a classic rock song, though, as that's mainly what she used to listen to. Anyway, I recorded like a 15-second clip of the song to make a ringtone. But when I played it back, there were words. It was very clear, and I showed it to multiple people that all heard the same thing. It kind of sounded like Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, saying it while gargling water. And what was really weird was that the last me that they said, it turned back into a guitar strum. It could be a glitch, could be a ghost. I don't know. But I definitely had physical proof of something. The next one, it could have been me hallucinating, but it also could be that it's easier for paranormal things to happen to us when we're sleeping or tired, as I'm starting to think anyway. I was again probably 3rd or 4th grade, and it was during the winter. I fell asleep watching TV in my parents' room. We only had 2 TVs in the house at the time, and I was awoken by my mom, who got me up and started walking me to my bedroom. We were in the hallway, walking to my room, when I saw what I thought was my older brother, laid back on my bed, reading a book that was resting on one leg that was bent up. I yelled, "Hey, get out of my room!" His head turned to look at me, and his eyes were wide open like he was shocked I could see him. He quickly jumped over the side of the bed out of view, and when I jumped on the bed to chase him, he was gone. It happened pretty fast and freaked my mom out. A few things thinking back after it happened. The lights were off, but he was kind of bluish in color. He was also wearing oldish-looking glasses, which my brother did not wear at all. Needless to say, I didn't sleep alone for a long time after that. Last night, or this morning, I get a call at 3 in the morning. It's my friend Daishi, and he's trying to FaceTime me. I probably would have ignored the call, but we never FaceTime each other, and usually when someone's calling that late into the night, it's most likely an emergency. So I was automatically a bit nervous at what I was going to see when I accepted the call. It connects, and his screen opens up. My picture in the corner of the screen works fine, but his feed is a black, glitchy mess, and the audio's equally garbled. What I do hear, through the sharp, choppy static, sounds like a woman screaming in Japanese. Then, the call ends, disconnected from his side. When my screen goes back to the main menu of my phone, I open up my favorites and I call him back. The phone rings 2 or 3 times before Daishi answers. His voice sounded tired and groggy. I'm like, "Yo, what was that all about?" And he goes, "Hey, what? Are you okay?" That's when I told him, "No, dude. Some girl just FaceTimed me from your phone, screaming." I could tell he was genuinely confused, so I started to tell him everything that happened when he interrupts me and asks me what time it is. I said it's 3:50. Hearing that, Daishi says, "Oh, fuck," and quickly hangs up. This makes my stomach turn, and I debate whether or not I should try to call him again. I decided to wait, and I planned on following up later in the day. But I didn't have to, as Daishi ended up calling me a couple of hours ago. He was in good spirits, telling me that he'd had an important meeting at work this morning. My phone call woke him up just in time. Apparently, his cat had knocked his alarm clock into his water dish sometime into the night. I asked who FaceTimed me last night, and he said he still has no clue what I was talking about. His phone didn't have any missed calls. Now, it being late evening, I've had some time to ponder about this. I know Daishi's mother passed away last year. She'd been battling breast cancer since before we graduated college and before he got this job. She died right after graduation. I think her last goal was to see her son get his diploma. I also think that she may have been the one to call me last night so I'd wake up Daishi for his meeting. The hairs on my arms are literally standing up right now. For as long as I can remember, I've never been able to escape the paranormal. Whether it be the television turning itself off at night as a child, or imaginary friends my older sister and I could both see for years. I've grown to become almost desensitized to anything out of the ordinary. Out of all the things that have come in and out of my current home, there's one being that's been there for as long as I can remember, and quite the odd one at that. For simplicity's sake, I'll just refer to him as Old Man. He's often heard walking throughout the basement, mostly in the spare living room that connects to another spare room. He's not spoken a word to any of us, but he really seems to dislike my mother's best friend, as when she lived with us for a short while, he'd bang on the laundry room walls when she was alone in there, and she'd swear up and down that he'd told her to get out. Nobody else had ever been told the same. Typically, the most that we would get was a whisper calling our names. And who knows if that was even him in the first place. So this was always perplexing to me. Personally, I think the Old Man is all right. He's been docile with my family, never moves things or bugs any of us. I've only seen him briefly here and there, but the description I have of him, it matches what everyone else in the house has seen of him. And everyone, except my mom's friend, can pretty much agree that he's harmless. When my room was in that spare room connected to the basement's living room, I'd often come home to an empty house after school and crash for a couple of hours while waiting for anyone else to come home. Sometimes I'd be so tired from staying up too late and having to get up so early that I'd fall asleep with the lights on. And in those cases, I'd wake up 90% of the time with the lights having been turned off for me. Nobody in my family ever admitted to doing it. And my parents really wouldn't have been the type to turn the lights off for me to sleep, since they found my messed up sleeping cycle and daily naps to be frustrating. With both of my siblings being gone most of the time around then, it was also unlikely that they'd lie about doing that for me. So I can only assume that it was the Old Man who had helped me out with the lights. I've always wondered if perhaps he's some sort of guardian, yet the way he acted towards my mom's friend contradicts that, since she's by no means a bad person or deserving of that. Though,
I can't even say for certain that it was the old man who did any of that, since she never saw him when the walls were being banged on. I wonder how many of you have had similar experiences with a being acting hostile to some while docile towards others. I've been reading a lot of strange stories, so I thought this would be a good place for mine. It happened over 30 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Every summer, I spent June and July serving hard labor on Grandpa's farm, and if I never have to see another live pig, I'll die happy. I hated it there, but my opinion didn't count for much. In fact, it didn't count for fuck at all. But the point is, I was there. Grandpa needed help, and I was the only one too young to say no. It's true what they say about farming. You really do gotta wake up at 5 a.m. every goddamn day. My chore list got a little bit longer with each trip, so the summer before senior year was especially brutal. But knowing it was my last infused me with just enough strength to persevere. Admittedly, persevere is a strong word, a strong, inaccurate word, but I survived, and I never served time in a psych ward. That, my friends, is called winning. Collectively, I spent a grand total of 20 months on that farm, and at least triple that just thinking about it. In all that time, I never experienced anything unusual until the final summer. Luckily, this actually has nothing to do with farming, only my grandpa's house, but more specifically, his basement. It was the morning of June 11th, and I was coming downstairs to breakfast when the old man's shrill curses reached my ears. I almost turned around, but that would only make things worse. Grandpa was one of those hard asses who wanted you to look at him cross, so that he could beat you senseless. That's how he got his jollies. But this time, he was really mad. I could practically hear his face turning red as spit flew, and I knew that that one vein would be predominant on his forehead. When I entered the kitchen, the basement door stood open, and Grandpa was at max volume downstairs, but I could also hear another sound, the sound of running water. I rushed halfway down the stairs before coming to a sudden stop. The room was flooding from a busted pipe, and the water was already 3 to 4 inches above Grandpa's ankles. I called out, but he didn't even look at me before finding the main shutoff valve. With the floodgates finally closed, Grandpa took notice of me, but he still had that look. So I quickly averted my gaze lest he interpret it as a challenge. Thankfully, he had bigger concerns at the moment, and I returned to being invisible. Once he was safely back up the stairs, I rolled up my pants and dove in. A ton of stuff was getting ruined. Random junk was floating by the steps, and dozens of boxes were half submerged. If I didn't fish them out, I would be the only one to blame later. I began placing boxes onto higher shelves as I circled the room, but in the corner, opposite the stairs, I froze at the sound of a large splash behind me. Grandpa didn't have any pets, and there's no way he returned to help. My head snapped to the sound's direction, but nothing was there. Just the same, almost calm, water surface. After several minutes of total silence, I tried to resume my duties, and I think that's what something was waiting for. The moment I bent over, something brushed past my leg. I imagine it's exactly what it would feel like if I were standing in a pool and someone swam by, except the water obviously wasn't deep enough for that to actually happen. I screamed like a girl, but Grandpa didn't return. I thought he simply hadn't heard me, but I made a break for the stairs and he was finishing his breakfast in the kitchen.
He didn't seem the least bit fazed by my outburst. He didn't even acknowledge me. All he did was mutter about expensive repairs and today's pansy youth. I was too shaken up to put much thought into his exact words, but I wish I had. After a hot meal and a moment to calm down, I felt fairly foolish for panicking. With a renewed sense of false courage, I returned to the flooded basement and resumed my place in the far corner. Everything was fine. I felt ridiculous for having worried, but only for a few seconds. As I bent down to pick up the last box, a cold, bone-thin hand clamped around my ankle in a steel-tight grip. My mouth opened wide, but no scream emerged, only a soft, dry croak. I wanted to pull my leg free to run, but I was paralyzed, and the grip on my ankle grew tighter. I expected my bone to snap at any moment. Desperate, I dared to look down into the murky water, and though I can never be sure if what I saw was real or merely my own warped reflection, there was a ghastly, white, pallid face staring back at me. The eye sockets were black and hollow, the cheeks were drawn, and its mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Maybe I went into shock, or maybe I had a panic attack. Either way, I couldn't breathe. It felt like my lungs were filling with water, and I couldn't get air. I couldn't choke. I couldn't fight back. I was completely helpless, and I have no clue how long I stayed that way. I only know that eventually, Grandpa was there, holding my head above water, shaking me like a crying newborn. I wasn't standing anymore. I was lying in the water, and the old man looked every bit as terrified as I felt. We didn't speak about what happened. He helped me upstairs. We called some plumbers, and they had the basement empty by that evening. Now, if nothing else had happened, I would think that I had a fit of temporary insanity or something and move on, but not with how things turned out. Grandpa's pipes were so old that they all needed to be replaced. To do that, a lot of the walls had to be ripped open, including one of the basements. There was a body in that bitch. The police were never able to identify the remains, but it was a male, and the top half of the skull was missing. I've just never really been able to process the whole thing. Sometimes I wonder if Grandpa killed that man. He fought the plumbers every step of the way. The police talked to him for a really long time, too. They didn't leave him alone until he got a lawyer. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything, does it? The old man died about 15 years ago, and on his deathbed, I asked him if he did it. But his mind was too far gone to answer. I guess it's one of those things I'll never know. But it feels much better to share my story with people who will believe it. Thanks for that. My name is Marcy. I'm 21 and I'm home for the summer. But soon I have to go back to college. And that's why I'm here with you. The commute involves a 4-hour ride through the endless sea of cornfields. And it's incredibly boring, especially if you go alone. That's why I wanted to find a few traveling buddies, but in the end, I only had Kathy and Margot. I didn't know them, and they didn't know each other, but we had a few friends in common. Kathy actually needed to stop about an hour before the cornfield leg of the journey, but Margot was stuck with me the whole ride, so ultimately, still a win. At least I thought it was. Apparently, Kathy and Margot really hit it off. Enough for Margot to ditch her own plans for a romp in the country. I definitely didn't see that one coming, but there was nothing to do about it. Nothing but get the next 4-hour drive over with. The cornfields began right on time and stretched as far as the eye could see. Within 30 minutes, I was already beginning to doze off, and by the hour mark,
I realized loud music wasn't enough to keep me going. It was only 10 p.m., but there hadn't been a single change in scenery, not even a passing vehicle, to break the monotony of that fucking corn. I almost didn't believe it when I saw a human-shaped blob come into view on the side of the road. I didn't think it was an actual person. I figured it was just a discarded piece of junk that looked weird in the distant light of the high beams. But once I did realize it was a man, I genuinely didn't know what to do. I didn't have much time to think it through. Normally, I would never stop for a stranger, but I considered it out of concern for their safety. Anyone in the middle of this road, on foot, had to be in a bad way, and that line of thought kind of made me think to keep driving even more. If he was in trouble, what would I be getting myself into? If he wasn't in trouble, why would he be there, flagging me down? If he was dangerous, what the hell could I really do about it? I didn't have a weapon, except for the car itself, of course. Either way, before I knew it, I was passing him, pretending not to notice his waving arms. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see his stationary form quickly engulfed by the darkness as I accelerated. Within a few moments, my heart rate slowed, and I was wide awake. I'd been on that road for almost 2 hours by then, and knowing another 2 were ahead made me want to cry. With the aid of unnecessarily loud rock music, I was able to put the stranger out of my mind entirely for almost 20 solid minutes. That's when another dark, human-shaped blur appeared in the distance. I didn't believe my eyes at first. It couldn't be the same man. That would be impossible. He certainly couldn't walk faster than my car, and I would have seen another vehicle pass by. But what were the odds of 2 hitchhikers being on that road so late? It didn't matter. I sure as hell wasn't going to stop, but when I got closer, I realized it actually was the same man. His hair was long, and he wore something resembling a trench coat. My heart stopped, and for an instant, I wondered if I had fallen asleep at the wheel, but I'd never felt more awake in my life. This time, he wasn't just waving his arms. He was running into the road, fully illuminated by the high beams. I could see his greasy hair slick to the side of his head. Then, as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't because his hair was greasy. It was caked in blood. Had this been the first time I saw the man, I probably would have stopped, but it wasn't. Injured or not, there was something very wrong about the whole situation. There was just no way he got to that spot before me. And it was the same man. I'm positive. Before I knew it, I was accelerating again, but only a few yards separated us. He still made no effort to move out of the way. At the last second, every part of my body, from my eyes to my asshole, clenched, and I swerved into the other lane. I only had my eyes closed for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity as I waited for the inevitable impact. Only the collision never came. When I knew I must be well past the man, I opened my eyes to see nothing but the highway in endless rows of corn stretching into the eternal darkness beyond. There was absolutely no fear of falling asleep after that. I drove as fast as I dared, hoping to put the last half of the trip behind me, but just after the 3-hour mark, I saw him one last time. When the light reached his form, he dropped down into a crouch. I was beyond terrified. Simple words cannot express that level of fear. It's something you can only understand through experience. But I wasn't frightened solely by the fact that he got ahead of me. Again, it was the crouch that really did it. He wasn't hiding from me. He was lying in wait, ready to pounce. I could feel it. My eyes remained fixed on the man as I closed the distance, and when I came within range, he leapt forward into the road. It happened so fast I couldn't follow his movement. A dark blur, suddenly sprang forward just as I was passing, and it collided with my front passenger side bumper. I felt the impact as I swerved, and this time, I lost control of the vehicle. I didn't know what to do. No one taught me how to handle this situation, but I managed to bring myself to a stop before the entire car was in corn. Had there been a ditch or something harder than corn stalks, I would have been stranded, or much worse. Terrified that the man would reappear any second, I reversed into the road, expecting to see a lifeless form on the pavement, but there wasn't. There was no sign of the man or blood. I wasn't about to get out and look around. I considered calling 911, but when I played the conversation in my head, it seemed like a bad idea. Nothing I experienced made sense. They would have probably asked me to stay put and send an officer to see if I was drunk. I was not staying out there for one more second. I was a nervous wreck for the rest of the drive, even after I got out of the cornfields. Every hill I topped, I expected to see the man again. My heart stopped dead each time I mistook something for his figure. But finally, I made it home without another incident. I'd worried about the damage to my car, but there wasn't a mark on it. I don't understand how that's possible. There was no dent, no blood, not even a scuff. Seriously, what the hell happened? I can't avoid that stretch of road without adding several hours to my trip, but I'm beginning to think it's worth it. I just couldn't handle going through that again, not even in the daytime. I love road trips. There's nothing more delightful to me than to get up an hour before sunrise and hit the road to a destination some hundreds of mile distance. However, there are occurrences in the wee hours when time gets thin and reality blurs around the edges. I'd like to share 3 of these stories that all share a phenomenon that I've called the screaming between. The first was during my move from North Carolina to California. I made it in a 4-day blitz across the continental U.S., which I was pretty proud of. Day 1 passed with no trouble. Moving from Goldsboro, North Carolina to Prattville, Alabama in about 12 hours. Day 2, I got all the way from Prattville to Baton Rouge, and I knocked off early to enjoy some beignets and gumbo. Day 3 was the day that I heard it. It was about 4 in the afternoon, with a relatively clear day around me. October isn't the hottest time in Texas, but my AC had quit working, so I had the window down. VNV Nation's Nemesis was blaring out of my shitty Honda Civic speakers when I heard a god-awful shrieking. It was like the sound of a big sheet of steel being torn lengthwise. In a panic, I turn off into a small pullout on the side of the I-10. And before I can even begin to figure out what's going on, rain is hitting the car. A couple of drops, then a torrent. And just ahead of me, where the road dips a bit, I see a runnel of water start. I look to my left, down to the south, and this massive thunderhead is pulling from behind a butte, and this wall of water is starting to pour across the road. Never saw anything like it before, and I was stranded there for a good 40 minutes as this flash flood poured not 20 feet ahead of my car, across the road. The next time was a road trip to Idaho. From my new home in the Mojave, I took the route up through Nevada via Amboy and Vegas, figuring that I could do the trip in about a day since the GPS predicted 12 to 13 hours for the drive. The snow was starting to come down, as this was a Christmas trip, my favorite time of year to take these journeys, visiting family and friends. I'd gotten roughly halfway there, around the town of Wells. It's honestly a bunch of truck stops and hotels, more of a stopover than a real town. I was starting to get drowsy. I'd taken longer than expected, due to a major traffic buildup a few hours before, and it was already pitch black around 11:30 p.m. I had just rolled down the window to let the blast of cool air rejuvenate me when I heard it. The same horrifying shriek of a sound. I jerked the wheel reflexively and skidded off the road. At that exact moment, an oncoming semi drifted right into the lane that I'd been in. The last story is another Christmas road trip. This time, I was going from the Mojave all the way to Illinois, and just my luck, a winter storm comes tearing along the I-70 just as I'm getting onto it during day 2 of my trip. It was insane. I'd gone from a slightly snowy but mostly clear day in Utah to a near whiteout conditions in under an hour. Now, I'm perfectly comfortable driving in the snow, and my SUV had its snow chains and 4-wheel drive in good condition. So I figure I can keep going a few hours at least. Then, of course, I hear it. That infernal hell shriek of a sound. This time, I could swear I heard it saying 13 as it screamed through the winter snow. By this time, I'm entirely out of fucks to give when it comes to that screaming, so I hit the next exit and I ducked into a hotel, even though it was only 7 p.m. and I'd been on the road for less than 9 hours. The next day, as I'm driving, I counted 12 vehicles on the side of the road, overturned and wrecked, each one with massive gashes in the sides of the vehicles, like they'd been peeled back by some horrible force. I still love road trips, but part of me is always listening for that screaming when I'm between towns. So this isn't my personal story. It's from my friend Jackson. We've been friends for 17 years, and in all that time, there's only one incident scarred in his memory. Years ago, we were on a camping trip with his family. It was the summer of 2008. We were relaxing on the way to our campsite. We arrived in a small town and decided to set up camp in their woods. Jackson's mom made dinner, and afterwards, we watched other camping videos. We made marshmallows, and we just all around had a fun time. Then, at roughly 8:30, we went to bed. And this is where we need to shift to Jackson's perspective. At around 1 a.m., he woke up, not knowing why, but since he was up, he decided to take a walk. It was around 5 minutes later when he heard something. He hadn't noticed it before, but there was a faint noise, a thump, drag, thump. Jackson, being the cocky shit that he is, muttered, "Assholes, don't know how to keep it down." He assumed it was a drunk, just taking long, exaggerated steps, but it stayed at the same volume. And then he got curious and walked towards the noise, hiding behind a bush when he got close enough. What he saw scared him so badly, he forgot to scream, and that's what saved him. A man was attempting to stick multiple dismembered body parts to a tree. He had a bag full of axes. That's what Jackson was hearing. The thump was the sound of the axe being used to stick a body to a tree, and the drag was from the man moving to the next tree. Then, the man looked directly at my friend, and Jackson ran. He somehow managed to lose the man, but he realized he was also lost. Switching to my perspective, I woke up hours later and I saw that Jackson was gone. I woke his parents and we eventually found him, but his clothes were torn, his eyes were baggy, and he was clearly in shock. We took him to the hospital and he began having nightmares. Every night, he'd wake up screaming, "Don't kill me, please." When he finally calmed down, he told me the story, and I believed him. I knew that he wouldn't lie to me. Now it's 14 years later, We're still good friends. This incident was never forgotten, only ignored, but I wanted to get it off my chest. I recently shared this story in a True Scary Stories Facebook group. I got a lot of feedback from people who lived in this area. It felt good to finally share my experience, so I'd like to leave it here as well. Well, shortly after posting, a woman contacted me to threaten myself and my family if I wrote about this man again. She believes he's innocent. It spooked me so much that I took my story down. I don't need weirdos like her in my life. I've since thought about this and decided to share my story again, but anonymously. It's my experience, and I'm not going to be frightened by some crazy bitch who dates child killers. So, here it is. I originally thought this incident happened in January of '84, but I now realize it was probably later in '83. I was 8 years old and lived in Aurora, Colorado, a suburb southeast of Denver. We lived in a brand new subdivision, and I loved it. Our ranch-style house was busy. I had 3 sisters, an older brother, a grandmother, and my mom living in our home. My 10-year-old sister and I shared a bedroom on the main floor. I loved this room. My twin bed was pushed against the wall that had the window facing our backyard, and at night, I liked pushing the curtains aside to look out. The window was elevated, but not so high that I couldn't easily see into the yard. My older sisters shared the room next to us, and my grandmother was in a large room across the small hallway. My mother stayed in a finished bedroom downstairs in the basement, and my brother had the rest of the basement. He was 16 at the time and had lots of friends that were always coming and going. I remember our house always being full of guests. We had a severe cold spell that week, so it was super icy outside. My sister and I had been playing in the backyard, which had not been enclosed with a fence. We had circular snow sleds that we would stand on and slide across the grass, and we left them strewn across the yard. That night, something woke me out of a sound sleep, and I thought about going downstairs to sleep with my mother. I did this from time to time, and she and I were really close. Then I heard a noise outside my window. It sounded like someone was slowly walking through the snow in the backyard. I could hear frozen grass crunching under their feet. Then I heard someone say, "Shit," and something clinked. I moved my curtain aside and I looked out the window. I expected to see my brother, one of his friends. He often came home past curfew and snuck through the backyard into an open basement window. I remember thinking he shouldn't be doing this on a school night. And in the morning, I planned to tell Mother that he woke me up. Only, it wasn't my brother. I saw a young man, probably in his early 20s, that I didn't recognize. I made eye contact with him and then quickly scanned the rest of the yard for my brother. I didn't see him anywhere. I was going to move away from the window, but the man's eyes were glued on mine, and he started walking towards my gaze. I froze. I couldn't move. He came as close as he could to the glass. He smiled at me. It was an eerie smile. It was an, "Oh look, you caught me doing something I shouldn't be doing," kind of smile. I remember he had crystal blue eyes, almost gray. Something about his expression was not right. Took me a few seconds to realize I was feeling fear. He was not a friend of my brother's, nor was he supposed to be in our yard at that time of night. I panicked, jumped out of bed, quickly ran downstairs to tell my mother. Once I got to the basement, I saw my brother was sound asleep. It scared me even more to know that the strange man was most likely not one of his friends. Mom calmed me down, came upstairs, turned on the outside light. She looked into the yard, but she didn't see anyone. She didn't make a big deal out of it, and I ended up spending the rest of the night with her, but I didn't sleep well. I wondered, why was the man in our yard? Where had he gone? I was also scared he might come back. I don't know the exact timeline, but it was roughly a few weeks later when a family was murdered by an intruder with a hammer and a knife in the middle of the night. The father, mother, and 7-year-old daughter were killed, and the 3-year-old daughter was left for dead but miraculously survived. This crime sent our entire community over the edge. The police didn't seem to know who did this horrible thing or why. All we knew was that the hammer killer probably chose the house at random, came through an open garage door. No one in my family ever mentioned the man I saw again, but I asked my mother about it years later and she tensed up. The hammer killer. The case went cold, the community moved on, and I moved further south. I never forgot that man in my yard, though, and I always felt that he might have been the same man who murdered that family. As years went by, more information came out. They linked the murder to a vicious murderer and rapist of women in another community. Thanks to DNA, they also linked him to a savage attack on a couple and a flight attendant in Aurora. He was a serial predator and active in our community that whole time. Fast forward to 2019, I'm watching the news and I can't believe it. They solved that murdered family's cold case from 1984, as well as the other attacks. They flashed the suspect's picture across the screen, and my heart stopped. It was him, the man I saw as a child. He frightened me so badly, his face is etched into my memory. I said something about it to my brother, but he just shrugged it off. I mentioned it to some friends, and they said it was creepy, but there was no way that I could have remembered something like that. I thought that they might be right. Until later, the news also showed photos of the suspect when he was younger. That is exactly the man I saw. I know it. It's changed the way I think about things. It's changed the gratitude I feel for my life. What if he hadn't tripped on those sleds and somehow made it into our house? My sisters and I could have been the ones on the news.